Welcome to The Explainer. So today we're doing a total mindset shift. I want you to go ahead and just put away the sterile spreadsheets, the perfectly color-coded project timelines, and those dense theoretical board decks. Instead, we're going to step right into the messy, complicated, and honestly, entirely human reality of true change leadership. Because leading change, it's not just about what you want to achieve on paper. It's an incredibly relational, highly political, and deeply ethical practice.
Okay, let's dive into this. You know the story, right? We've all seen it happen. A corporate strategy looks absolutely flawless in the boardroom. I mean, the numbers make sense, the market is demanding it, the CEO announces it with a big splash. Yet, fast forward 6 months down the line, and the actual implementation completely falls apart on the ground. So why does this happen? Well, it turns out it's mostly because leaders fundamentally misunderstand their actual role during a transition. They treat change like it's just some administrative task to be monitored, rather than a messy human transition that needs to be actively led.
Let's be clear. Change management and change leadership are two very different beasts. Now, change management is absolutely crucial, don't get me wrong. That's your planning, your scheduling, your resource allocation, and all the control mechanisms. But change leadership, that is all about vision. It's about motivation, building coalitions, and actually sustaining people's commitment when everything around them feels totally uncertain. The evidence base here actually describes successful leaders as change agents. They have to balance this really delicate tension, aggressively driving progress and organizational viability forward, while at the exact same time protecting the actual humans doing the work. Section 1, the currency of change, trust, and true commitment. Let's get into it.
So the crucial point is this. To pull off real change, a leader's vision is practically worthless without the currency required to actually get people to buy into it. And that currency? It's trust. But what does that really look like in practice? Well, the gold standard here is affective commitment. This is where employees willingly believe in and genuinely embrace the change because they actually see the value in it. Contrast that with what we call continuance commitment, which is basically just surface compliance driven by fear. It's people complying just because they're terrified of losing their jobs or they feel like they literally have no other choice. Extensive organizational data shows us that credible leaders produce that willingness-based affective commitment, and that is what actually drives change success. Continuance commitment, on the flip side, negatively impacts change. Forced compliance is honestly just a fragile illusion of success.
But how do you actually build that credibility? Because, let's face it, employees don't just blindly trust a nice smile. They are continuously assessing the change through what's called a four-trust model. They're constantly asking themselves, do I trust the organization itself? Do I trust the leadership team? Do I trust the process we're using to get there? And finally, do I actually trust that the promised outcomes will happen? What this means is that a leader can be super charismatic and personally really well-liked, but if employees fundamentally distrust the process, maybe it feels a bit secretive or rushed, the change is still going to fail.
Moving on to Section 2, the turf war, power, politics, and resistance.
All right, this brings us to the elephant in the corporate boardroom, power. Organizational change is never just a rational process. It's a deeply political one, shaping outcomes at literally every single hierarchical level. Have you ever been in one of those meetings where everyone nods and agrees to a new initiative, but you just know deep down no one is actually going to do it? The literature calls this politicized conformance. It's when visible, surface-level compliance is enacted purely as a political act. People are saying yes because it's the politically safe thing to say, not because they've genuinely internalized the change. So warning, surface-level agreement does not equal genuine commitment. Sometimes yes is just a tactical maneuver.
Because of this, we need to completely reframe how we view resistance. When employees push back, leaders so often assume, oh, they just don't understand the vision. I just need to communicate it better. Let's send out another mass newsletter. No way. Resistance is often not a misunderstanding at all. It's actually the manifestation of a complex political struggle. It's a legitimate distributional conflict over resources, over status, over autonomy. When you realize resistance is a political struggle, you start to see that overcoming it requires real, genuine negotiation and coalition building, not just another shiny PR campaign.
Now, this is exactly where the concept of sense-giving becomes a literal superpower for leaders. Sense-giving is the influence work of shaping meaning. Think about it. A strategic change starts as just a cognitive construct in a leader's mind. Success only happens when leaders can communicate that mental representation effectively to others. They have to reframe threats into opportunities, reinterpret losses as transitions, and build vital coalitions along the way. You essentially have to give sense to the change before people can start to make sense of it themselves.
All right, Section 3, the invisible architecture, culture, and psychological safety.
So all of this political and trust-building work we've been talking about, it all happens within a specific environment. Think of it as your company's invisible architecture, its culture, and the level of psychological safety it provides. You'll often hear a new executive come in and declare, "We are changing the culture starting today." But wait, leader behavior is completely contingent upon the existing organizational culture. You can't just impose new values from a podium. A leader's influence is deeply mediated by the conversational interactions, the unwritten rules, and the cultural patterns that are already deeply embedded in the workplace. It's a bidirectional trap, really. Leaders have a dual role. They are generators of new culture, yes, but they are simultaneously carriers and shapers of the old one.
To shape that culture successfully, especially during turbulent times, you absolutely need psychological safety. But let's just pause here and ask a really critical question directly. Does psychological safety mean there are no consequences for poor performance? Does it mean everyone gets a participation trophy and we just lower our standards? Honestly, this is perhaps the biggest corporate myth out there today.
And this brilliantly illustrates the truth. Amy Edmondson, who is literally the pioneer of this concept, defines it perfectly. Psychological safety means no one will be punished or humiliated for errors, questions, or requests for help in the service of reaching ambitious performance goals. See that? Ambitious performance goals. Psychological safety and accountability are complementary. They aren't competing. It's what allows teams to take the necessary learning risks required during a transition without ever lowering performance standards.
Edmondson's research shows exactly how this practically translates into results. It starts with team leader coaching, leaders actively empowering people and, crucially, showing vulnerability. That step creates the psychological safety. Then that safety unlocks learning behavior where people feel comfortable reporting what's failing and trying out new iterative approaches. And finally, that learning directly drives team performance. Without safety, employees just hide the failures. They don't voice alternative approaches, and the whole change implementation crashes and burns.
On to Section 4, the ethical crucible, the great AI pivot.
Let's ground all these academic frameworks in today's most urgent reality. What actually happens when a change is so profound that it threatens the very livelihoods of the workforce? Well, we enter what the literature is calling the great AI pivot. Corporations are systematically reducing human headcount to fund new automation and AI capabilities. Now, this isn't just some routine software upgrade. This is a fundamental restructuring that truly tests a leader's moral reasoning. When managing this kind of crisis-driven change, leaders face the really harsh knowledge of collateral damage. It's the reality that decisions that benefit some stakeholders, like shareholders, will inevitably harm others, like displaced workers. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is seeing how we balance this. We are facing immense ethical challenges right now, things like algorithmic bias, digital inequality, and huge data privacy concerns. But stakeholder theory provides us with clear, evidence-based interventions, procedural fairness, capability building, and transparent communication. Leaders are the primary governance actors here. They are the ones responsible for mediating between this rapid technological capability and basic human welfare. Let's look a little more closely at procedural fairness, because an ethical transition isn't just about handing out standard severance packages on a Friday afternoon and calling it a day. It requires preserving human dignity. Procedural fairness means actually involving affected employees in the transition planning. It means providing genuine choices wherever possible. And crucially, it means ensuring that the criteria for these massive workforce decisions are consistent, communicated, and contestable. If you're leading a change, you simply cannot make life-altering decisions purely behind closed doors and expect to maintain any sort of organizational legitimacy. Finally, Section 5, the integrated change leader. Let's move to see how this builds and pulls everything together. These themes we've explored, power, trust, culture, ethics, they are not just the sequential checklists you can tick off on a Monday morning. They form a continuous, interacting system of leadership. Sponsorship establishes the authority and energy behind the change. Trust translates that energy into real, effective commitment. Political competence allows you to actually navigate those interest groups to make feasible decisions. Psychological safety ensures your team can iteratively learn without fear. And structural inclusion preserves your ethical legitimacy. Trust, transparency, and inclusion are not just nice-to-have ethical ideals. The evidence consistently shows they are hard performance drivers. You literally cannot succeed without them. I want to conclude this explainer by leaving you with a provocative thought, really challenging your own leadership mindset. Think about a situation where structural transparency is severely constrained. For example, maybe commercial sensitivity legally prevents you from communicating early about redundancies. In that moment of silence, what ethical obligations do you still carry? And how will you discharge them when the time finally comes? The reality of change leadership isn't about having a perfect plan on a spreadsheet. It's about navigating that exact tension with wisdom, integrity, and a relentless focus on the humans sitting right at the center of the transition. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep exploring these dynamics in your own work.